Well, welcome back, Exes and podcast fans. Hey guys, I'm really excited because guess what? I have a really exciting topic that I'm really excited to talk about today, as always with the excitement. Um, but I just kind of want to add a trigger warning, just because I don't know how other people are going to perceive this topic. If it's a triggering topic for you, we're going to be talking about toxic families and this idea of abuse and abuse in childhood and really it might be uncomfortable, but I just wanted to throw that out there because I know we have a lot of people who come here for the anti-MLM content. So if this episode isn't for you, hey, you know what, I totally get it, but I really hope that you have a willingness to listen because the guest that I have today has quite the story, and I really do hope that this topic really does become more popular because we need to support our fellow humans out there who have unfortunately grown up with these toxic environments. So with that being said, you guys, I'm excited because we have somebody that we've had on a couple of times, and this person has added so much wisdom in so many different areas. And now we get to talk to another one, and we have Ixia. You guys, welcome Ixia back. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you for having me, Danny. You're making me blush.
Well, I love that we have this in common, right?
Yeah,
Because I feel like today it's becoming more common. I think you said that the conversation is becoming much more, I guess, appropriate than it used to be. But what is it about this topic that you felt it was so important that we do have the conversation about it?
yeah. So I specifically was wanting to talk to you about no contact in relation to toxic family systems and stuff like that. And I think it's really important because not only is there like this kind of social and moral outrage towards it, where for the people who've made that choice, such as myself, it really was a big decision, and it was often a long time coming. And for myself especially, it was one of the most beneficial decisions I made for my life. Like, there was a lot of struggle after making the decision to go no contact, but in terms of like my mental health, like I've done so much healing that I wouldn't ever make a different choice, and I'm very secure in my choice. And I guess part of the reason I think it's so important is I want to validate other people who are struggling, who in like maybe considering this choice, um, and also like show that it's, if you don't make this choice, it's okay. Like, you don't have to make the same choice I did, but like it, you can still respect the people who have those choices. Maybe like demystify some of the prejudices around the choices of going no contact. And of course, there's always going to be like the crazy, like estranged parent who cannot get over it. But we're not here to talk to them specifically. So
Right. I love that. Yes. Oh my gosh. You're that. Yes, there is a such, like you said, moral outrage about this whole idea of going no contact. This outdated thought process that you have to respect your elders. If there is one thing I want my children to understand, if there is an adult who's not respecting you, they don't fucking deserve your respect. Now, of course, there are nuances, right? Like you have a boss or a teacher, people that you have to coexist with in the world. But if there's a like an aunt or an uncle or a peer of some sort that's an adult that's like being completely disrespectful of who you are as a human, you don't have to fucking respect them. I in no way force my kids to have respect towards the family members that I have myself gone no contact with, because as a kid, I was forced to endure the abuse of these other adults who really enabled the behavior that was happening. For me, it's my mom, but from my understanding, it's well, and her kind of her whole side of the family. But for you, it's both of your parents, right?
yeah, I'm not in contact with either of my parents, and I've been no contact coming up on a full 8 years now. And I think also people have maybe some ideas of what type of family you have to come from in order to go no contact. Like, the type of upbringing that I had was mostly a lot of psychological manipulation, a lot of like emotional neglect, and just like having emotionally immature parents, and the negative ways that that impacted me, that I was probably set on a path for destruction if I hadn't made the choice for myself. Like, I would have been repeating those same patterns. And so I think people think, well, like, you have to be literally at the point where you're being chained in a basement and like locked up for hours at a day if you're going to go that extreme to make that choice. And the answer is no. And just like in what you said to like, I don't make my kids like interact with certain people if like they don't have to do that. I like to say relationships are optional. You don't have to be in relationship with somebody in your life, regardless of who they are. And if you find that anybody is treating you poorly on a consistent basis, you don't owe them your friendship, your connection, your relationship with them. They aren't entitled to that. And go find people who actually will value and cherish you and put the same energy back towards you as you're giving to them. Whether that's like a boss, whether that's your family, whether that's a friendship that you've had for 20 years, like all of those things are optional. There are great people out there. Just make space for them, and there's not going to be space for great people if you've filled up all your space with toxic people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I love that you talked about, like, people think of the extremes, like you said, that you have to get to this really almost physically dangerous place. Not to say that that doesn't happen with people. That really can happen, but it doesn't have to be to that point. And people think that if you didn't go through something like that, that you have there's no justification for going no contact. And if that's something that I think is very important for people to understand, is that when you're talking about a family dynamic of toxicity, it doesn't have to be physical abuse. Now, it can be part of it. I validate that. But it doesn't always have to be. Like you said, psychological abuse. And for me, it was very similar, except for when we talk about emotional immaturity, we're talking about almost like stunted growth when it comes to the person that I've got no contact, which is my mother. And this is not to out her as anything, just so you guys know, if you guys know me and you know the situation and you want to choose to believe the things that you do, that's fine. That's up to you. But I'm not saying this to out her in any way. A lot of this is public information, but it's also my story to tell because of how heavily it impacted me. And I just want to throw that disclaimer out there. But there is so much that can come from just coming from a dynamic where there's either a power imbalance between the parents. That was kind of how it was for me as well. My parents were separated at the time, but it's how it makes you feel. We tell our kids all the time, right? Or for anybody who has like nieces, nephews, whoever, we tell children, if something makes you uncomfortable and feel icky, tell us. Like, you don't have to go along with whatever that is. And in the stereotype is that we're talking about any sort of like SA or abuse or things of that nature, but that goes for everything. If you have somebody who says something to you that makes you feel icky inside, your feelings matter. You're going to live with you for the rest of your life. Your feelings are okay. And if that makes you feel uncomfortable, I don't care what it was, you don't ever have to interact with that individual again. And if it happens to be a family member who makes you feel that way, we don't talk to them ever again. And when it comes to those toxic behaviors and patterns of behavior, what were the things that you had seen that were patterns that were kind of very prevalent in your youth that really led you to the decision to go no contact?
Oh, it wasn't any one sort of thing. Like growing up, I didn't realize what I was going through. Because again, it's like we compare ourselves to the extreme versions of things. For the longest time, I thought I had a great childhood. I thought we had a healthy family. I thought that everything was pretty normal. And when you go through certain kind of trauma, like I've noticed this thing where you kind of gravitate to other people who have similar traumas when you're going through like, school and stuff. So I had friends who were going through stuff at home too that maybe I didn't know about, but it was impacting them the same way. So if it was worse than what I was going through, then I was like, oh, I have a really good family. Or if it was just like different but odd, I'm just like, oh, well, they're just kind of weird, but my family's normal. And so not really having a healthy thing to compare it to, and just the types of friendships that my family made too, like the going over to like my parents friends house and hanging out with their kids, it's like they are also drawn to people who are maybe similar than them or have that kind of similar performative thing. So like everything that I was exposed to was kind of in the same bubble, and I'm thinking it's normal. And ironically enough, it wasn't until I heard people like talking from stage and worldwide about like what marriage should be, and they have like these glamorized kind of like perfect marriages, but definitely healthier marriages, that I was like, oh, like I thought my parents' marriage was good because they weren't divorced. um, and it there wasn't like fighting, but there's like a lot of avoidance, and so there's just like this common like thing of growing up like thinking that what you're going through is normal, not realizing how it's affecting you, and then as you grow and mature and you start noticing things, like I described like what I went through. It wasn't like one single moment or like lots of big moments. It was death by 1,000 cuts. um, and my big kind of breakthrough in what I was going through, like I had a very kind of like traumatic experience with a relationship falling apart, and instead of like there was a lot of like pining about like how can I get him back and all this kind of like emotionally immature stuff that I was going through at the time, but there was also part of me being like something is wrong with me. What is wrong with me? And just like really wanting to be like I need to fix what's wrong with me because whatever I gave what I thought was good enough wasn't good enough. Therefore, if I fix myself, maybe he'll actually want to be in a relationship with me, which is not the right attitude to have, but it took me in the right direction. And I no longer have that attitude, thank God. And I don't want to be in a relationship with that person anymore. But I remember like it was actually like an Amazon book recommendation. I don't even know how the algorithm put this in front of me, but it was called Running on Empty by Jonice Webb. And it was talking about childhood emotional neglect, where it's like you might have had all your physical needs met, but you weren't seen as a person. You weren't valued and cherished. Your individuality wasn't built up and seen and valued, and parts of yourself might have been shut down because it didn't meet the expectations or the desires of the parents. So you hide that part of yourself, and it was like this huge, eye-opening moment of like that's what's wrong with me. I have all of those symptoms that come out of it, and it led into that choice of like I'm not going to get what I need ever. I'm 23 at that point, being like I have worked so hard my entire life to get that, to be seen, to be like valued for my strengths and be forgiven for my weaknesses, and just to be loved for who I am without performing, and I'm never going to get that. The bar is always going to be raised, and I am never going to be able to clear it. It's never coming my way, and I've worked so hard. I'm not going to bother anymore. I don't care. I don't want it anymore. And when I hit that point, I'm like, I'm just going to leave. There's no point in hanging around. Like if you're not going to get love from people who are supposed to love you, why are you still there? Like on a logical level, like what is the point? And so that there was that, it fed into that logical choice of like, okay, I'm going to leave. I'm going to find people who love me. I'm going to build my own life and do my own thing and just be my authentic and true self. And I don't need these people in my life. They don't have to be part of it in order for me to achieve that.
Yeah. Wow. And you know what that kind of made me think of, right? Is like it which is a totally valid question. I love that. Like why are you sticking around? And it makes me think of and the way that the other people react to it, right? Is we ask survivors of abuse, right, who had DV situations, why didn't you leave? Right? That's an acceptable thing to ask. They were experiencing abuse and it was impacting them. And so we find it appropriate, which is not, but we find it appropriate to say, well, why didn't you just leave? Right. But why is it that we can't have that same viewpoint of children who are experiencing abuse from their parents? Why can't we say that same thing, like, well, why didn't you leave? And there's it's almost, I mean, it's the same kind of thought process, at least for me it was with abuse. I'm like, well, I can't leave, like that's my mom, or that's there's something that ties you there. But we should be able to ask that internal question with children of abusive parents of why didn't they leave, and we need to further understand that same question. And people need to start questioning adults. If a child goes no contact with an adult, stop asking the children, why did you go no contact? Ask the parent, why? What did you do to cause this to happen? Because there is a huge misconception that somehow children are the manipulators and that we are the reasons why this had happened. And I don't know if you had the same experience, but it was very much this is the child's fault. And this dates back to a very, very young age, and with your same thought process of I'm not good enough, right? Well, to other people, the parent, for me, my mom was telling them that I wasn't good enough. My mom was very clear to other people that I had bad behavior, that like she was an oversharer for sure. Everybody knew that I was a quote bad kid, and I received that until I was a fucking adult. Fuck those people who still said that shit. But nobody questioned my mom. No one said, well, what were you doing to cause those behaviors? What did you do? It was always, oh God, it's her. Like nobody's going to convince me that a 7-year old or even through to teenage years is it has the wherewithal to manipulate a fucking adult. I'm sorry. There's no fucking way that it's the child's fault. But it's the victim blaming. We victim blame abuse survivors who had abusive parents more even than we do with DV survivors. And I wish that people would just view them as one and the same. They are survivors of abuse. And actually, that was a really big point of contention that you wanted to talk about was how people reacted to going no contact. But I kind of want to go before we get into that point. When you decided to go no contact, what was happening internally? Because I feel like people don't understand how heavily this impacts and weighs on a person who makes that decision.
Internally, like I kind of got to this cold kind of detached place. Like I remember having like the very vividly the day that I realized I'm like I actually don't love my mom anymore. And I couldn't even tell when that started to happen, at what, like, even at how far back that started going, but I just remember when I finally realized I was at that point. And so I know that's not everybody's experience. A lot of people experience a lot of guilt and shame. And I was just stubborn and bitter and angry about how I was being treated. I never was encouraged to advocate for myself or stand up for myself. That was part of the attitude I grew up with. It's okay for us to be mad at you, but you can't be mad at us. Or we can tell you no, but you can't tell us no. We don't have to listen to you and your boundaries, but you can't treat us a certain way. It was always a one-way street. And I was finally like advocating for myself. And it wasn't easy. Like I know that like a lot of people experience guilt and shame, and there's the societal pressures and all the other messaging. And one thing that I like noticed, like that's different from where I am now 8 years later to when I started, was like I don't feel the need to justify it anymore. But in the beginning, like when come out of a traumatic situation and you finally realize what you've gone through, and you're trying to get people to understand, you want people in your corner, you want people on your side. Like you just had this major revelation of what you've been through, and you tell anybody kind of who will listen. Like I went through this, like this is awful. And then you get the kind of victim blaming of just like, oh well, was it really that bad? Or like, do you like maybe you need just don't understand your parents. It's like they did the best they could. Like they actually love you. It's just expressing it in their own way. And like maybe that's true in some cases, but I can at least confidently say for like most cases for people who make that choice to go no contact, it's just like no, like that's not the situation I was in, and you're making excuses to the parents, and you're not seeing me. I'm telling you this because I need to be seen. I need to be heard. I need someone. Like I'm questioning everything I'm doing right now. Somebody please validate me. And that can happen for anybody. Like everybody gave like Prince Harry so much slack or like so much flack, sorry, for airing out quote quote the royal family's dirty laundry. But I was just like, nope, I'm in this boy's corner because he was doing exactly what I was doing. He's trauma vomiting on people, being like, somebody believe me, somebody see what I went through. I'm not crazy, right? Like this is awful. And I know that probably like it's been a couple of years now, and even a few more years down the road, if he hasn't hit this point already, he's going to look back on that interview with like Oprah and like really cringe about how much he was oversharing. But I don't fault him for that because that is part of that cycle. And to the people who were hard on him and saying like you didn't have any, like you shouldn't have anything to cry about, you were a prince, like really don't understand. Like I'm happy for you that you didn't have a psychologically damaging upbringing, that you can think that money, living in privilege, is going to like be the remedy for all your psychological problems. Because I grew up upper middle class. I didn't have want for anything like physical. My physical needs were met. I had like shelter, clothing, food. All of those things were met, but like you can give all those things to a pet too, and not have the same emotional connection that you should have with a child. And I always described it as like just because the bird cage is made out of gold doesn't mean that it's still not a cage. Like so
Yeah. Wow. Yes, yes, all of that. Oh my God, yes. And that's for the frustrating part is that it's, I feel like, so I'm a lot newer to this. So we kind of have a really big contrast where you've been no contact for 8 years. I'm 1 year no contact. And so it's still, I still consider it very new and very fresh. Um, and I'm definitely on the Prince Harry side of things where I want people to understand, like, why did I make this decision? I made this decision because I never felt, like you said, that connection. Like you can, like, something that somebody said to me recently, which really pissed me off, was that like, oh, but your mom gave you things. My family didn't give me things. Your mom did. And I'm like, but that doesn't matter. Like your experience with a different parent and then your experience knowing my parent is not the same. You don't, just because you had one view, like even two kids who were raised by the same parent have two different parents. Like me and my siblings, we all have different versions of my dad, which I'm thankful, I'm very grateful. I feel like I'm very privileged in the sense that I do have one parent who gets it, but I really empathize with people who don't have that. That's something that I really do understand, that I not everybody has that. And that's where something that I feel like other people need to understand, that it's okay if you don't have another parent who agrees with you. There's going to be somebody there who's going to value you and not just believe you, but understand where you're coming from and be there for you. And that's something that my dad does for me. But each of my siblings, we all have a different version of my dad. Like my little brother and little sister are my son's age. So, of course, they get a way older version of my dad. And my dad was very, very young when I was younger. Like, I remember my dad turning 30, and I am now 30. Like, if that goes to say, you know, but you don't get to go, and this is something I've talked about, is you don't get to go around and validating other people's experiences based on your one opinion. And that irks me. But I also wanted to kind of go to this Prince Harry thing where people were chastising him, like you said, because he's in privilege. And it's like you said, good. I'm glad you didn't have that experience, because whether you grow up with an extremely wealthy parent or even in poverty, the abuse can be the same. But I mean, sure, you might be able to have abuse at a higher level if you got more money. Like, various different things. There's a lot of nuance to it.
Well, and the pain isn't comparable. Like somebody's like, what might be like your worst day in your life might have been just somebody else's bad week. Like because you did, like everyone's built different, and what you're sensitive to and what you value as a person and care about is different from other people. And just because their pain is different than yours doesn't mean that it's any more invalid than your pain. And like yeah, Prince Harry might not have ever had to like worry, and I didn't have to worry about like where is my next meal coming from. Like I'm not getting the same poverty trauma as somebody who's had to like didn't know when their next meal was, or like were so physically neglected. Like they're going to have a different type of trauma and the way that affects them and the stuff that they have to work through than I do. But it doesn't mean that I wasn't damaged and that my pain is any worse or less than like for me than their pain is for them. And like one thing that I really like want to encourage you, just where you're in, like as you heal, as you work on yourself and like starting to undo those like things, and working through those specific traumas that you have, your triggers, identifying them, like and figuring out like why certain things bother you, or like what's freaking you out, and start working through them, you actually get to the point where you don't feel like you need other people's validation anymore. Now if people find out that I'm no contact from my family, like it's not something I hide, but it's not something that I need to talk about all the time anymore either. Um, but like it tells me a lot actually about that person than based on how they react. But it's really interesting because the kind of common reactions I see are the people who are like have awesome, wonderful families that they grew up in, and they're just like flabbergasted. Like I couldn't imagine ever doing that to my mom. I'm like, yeah, well, your mom sounds like she's awesome. She would never do those things to you. So like, of course, you couldn't do this to your mom. Like that would actually be horrible if you did that to like your wonderful mother. Like you would be doing it for literally no reason. Or they're the people who are just like it makes them anxious because they need you to reconnect with your family so that they no longer have fear about their child doing the same thing to them. They kind of tell on themselves that they're worried like their kid will do that to them. They kind of figure it out and be like, oh, like if I was my kid, I would cut myself off. I hope they don't figure that out. And now I've met someone who's cut their parents off. It's like, no, 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 no. You need to go talk to your family and you need to be reconnected and all happy so that I can feel better about my parenting. Or yeah, like it's kind of like that, or there's just like the people who are jealous, I want to say, like is probably the best word to encompass it, but it's like you can tell that they're offended by your choice because they're not brave enough to make that for themselves. They would love to go no contact, but they bought into the family Kool-Aid of like loyalty and like keeping secrets, and no matter what, like dad's dad and mom's mom, and like we're a family, we stick together, and they really in their heart want to be able to do what I've done, but they're so freaked out, like they're just offended that I made the choice. So those are kind of like the common reactions, and then there are the people who are like, you know what, I don't know what like you've gone through to for you to, but to, for you to make that choice, like it must have been really important that you did that. So like I don't get it, but I accept it. And then there are people like you who are like, I get it. Like I understand what like, and I support you. So
Yes, they're so yes. The people who get it, they get it. And
yeah,
I love that you said that. I hope too that I get to a point where I don't feel as if I mean I'll always be an advocate. I'll always be have a willingness to have people on here and discuss this conversation and talk about it. But in my personal life, I really do hope I get to a point where I don't feel like I even have to justify it to myself anymore because I still have to do that. This is what I wish people would fucking understand. People don't get the fact that I w- it was a very hard choice for me to make because my mother had this level of codependency where I took care of so many different things for her. And it was just this constant cycle of abuse. It was very similar to what I would consider for DV. It was the love bombing. It was then, everything's okay for a minute. But then once, at the drop of a hat, the abuse starts again. Then we're talking about the gaslighting and the I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And it's just a horrible cycle to be in, but it's even worse when you're kind of stuck in it because it's your own parent. And how do we tell people that we break the chains of abuse? We have to do what's different. And for us and other people in the same situation, it was making the decision to go no contact. But that doesn't mean it was easy for me. Like I went through so many different moments of like, I mean, now I'm kind of where you're at. I can say a year later, I'm happy I made the choice. But in the beginning, I almost needed to be told it was okay to do that. And I did have somebody who I just greatly appreciate so much, who's in my corner, who has the most support for me, who truly loves my kids and myself and my significant other enough to say, you're okay. You're only going to be hurting your children by staying. And I have so much value for the person who told me that because it was that day when I saw that person that I made the decision to go no contact. And I did it silently. I did not make it this huge ordeal. I went in, I blocked her on Facebook, I blocked her phone number, and that was that. I did not need to do anything further, but that doesn't mean that I didn't go back. Like once I finally got back to where I was at home, that doesn't mean I didn't cry about it. That doesn't mean that I haven't thought like, am I doing the right thing? Am I a horrible person? But it's the same thing that I always want to tell other people or my children that your feelings matter. And when you have worked so hard to put somebody else's feelings first and keep them on this pedestal, you lose yourself. And at some point, you have to put yourself first. And and for me, it was having to realize that this is going to hurt my kids. And my kids are neurodivergent. Not that it's any different for neurotypical kids, but for my neurodivergent children, I can't have somebody as explosive around them. There's no way. Like my kids need a consistent, calm environment. Does that mean that we don't have our own chaos at home as a result of the trauma? Sure, that happens. But we also don't have the level of explosiveness that was in our life when my mother was a part of it. And I do still kind of fall within that guilt aspect of it. But I think that you showing this other side where it's like, I don't fucking care. I love that too.
yeah, and you can get there. And like I'm like I know that I said like it was kind of like a cold, kind of logical decision when I made it, but that didn't mean that I didn't have kind of emotional fallout. I didn't feel so much like I didn't feel the guilt for the decision for cutting off the people who they were, but I had a lot of grief for the family that I wished that I had, for the parents that I wish that they had been, and even yeah, even to an extent, like I could see that there were ways in which my dad was trying, but I knew that he couldn't deliver consistently. And so like he'd send me something that was like actually like really like I don't know, like very gentle. Like he would sometimes send me like little like cartoons. I'm gonna cry. And I could see that that was the type of dad he wanted to be, but it's not the dad that he's able to be consistently. Not now, and maybe not ever, but I can't make that happen. I can't fix him. I can't push him to want to be a better person. I can't do that work for him. And I've always been in the position that if my family ever decided to make those choices and do that work on their own, that would be when I'm willing to go back to try and make that work because they've done that on their own initiative. But before that, I'm not going to try because I know that like if you're not growing by default, you're regressing. And they haven't worked to grow and to be better people. They haven't done the introspection to be the people that they could be. And I'm not going to hold my breath for that. I'm not going to make an exception for that, being like, well, I guess they'll just put up with that. But if they ever did, I'd be totally open. But I also never told them that's what I wanted from them because I also knew that just with the emotional maturity they have, they'd go to therapy for the emotions, being like, "We checked the box. You have to talk to us now." And I'm like, "That's not what it's about." And like, my family kind of doesn't believe in therapy either, so I don't really think it's going to happen. But that's a whole other weird reason why they don't believe in therapy. But I had to grieve all of that, grieve that there was the desire there, but it couldn't live up to what it needed to be to work. Grieve the parents I never had, and there was like lots of yo-yoing too, because I grew up kind of privileged. Like I know that we were talking a little bit before this that I mentioned that like one of the ways that they tried to like compensate for not being able to like love me was to like give me material needs and desires. I would actually classify myself as pretty spoiled. And I'm glad I'm not that person anymore. I'm just like scraping by paycheck to paycheck, saving a little bit each time, and I'm much happier for it. Um, but like I would have like this material stuff, and when I left home, I did it while they were out of the country, and there was a bunch of furniture. Like I lived in a second property that my parents owned, which also sounds like super privileged because it was. And they bought a bunch of IKEA furniture, and I just took because I was under the impression it was for me to use and to have, and so I took a bunch of it with me to furnish my apartment. And it was so weird because I was getting emails from my mom after I left when they came back being like, oh my gosh, like we don't know what we did to make you hate us. Like we love you, we miss you. But then the next email would be like, you took a bunch of our stuff and you're like a thief and you shouldn't have taken that. Like that wasn't for you to have. And it's just this yo-yoing back and forth of manipulation from like trying to sweet talk me back into like guilting me for what I'd done to like, and I kept all of it because I wanted like a record. Like I was fully prepared to be like, if they start stalking me, because I don't trust them not to do something crazy like that, I want to have like receipts and to be able to take legal action if I have to. I can't afford anything, but I will find a way. And just be it was so weird to yo-yo between like we love you to like you're a thief to like can't believe you've done this, we're so hurt, to be like how dare you do this, like, and it was so emotionally exhausting. And basically all I would write back is please tell me what I took that I wasn't allowed to have and I will return it. And that was the literally one sentence response I would send back to every single email until I got the email from my mom being like, you can just keep the stuff. Because it wasn't working. It wasn't about the stuff. It was about trying to get me back. And I held on to that furniture for so long. It's only recently that I've chosen to downsize to be able to save even more money that like I finally have actually gotten rid of virtually all the furniture that I had from my parents' house and have my own stuff. And even that was an evolution of this journey, being like, oh, like now I'm buying my own things now. I'm not using this kind of like stuff that I got from before. I'm buying all stuff from like thrift stores. It's like I actually bought new IKEA furniture this year, and that kind of milestone is just even like another step in healing. And like so, if you're feeling that yo-yoing of like I feel really bad, but like no, I'm convicted. It's like I need someone to validate me. It's just like no, but like I don't need them to validate me because they're going to tell me to go back. Like I'll just do it. Like all of that. That's so normal. Like it is so normal. You have to grieve. You have to like go through this emotional roller coaster, and it's like a pendulum, and eventually it will settle, and you'll feel centered. And there's sometimes like things that like come and flick the pendulum a little bit, and I'm like my parents will send me like a letter or something to try and reconnect through a family member. And I'm glad I have some people in my corner who are willing to like be a barrier for me, but like sometimes that will be very triggering for me just depending on what other stressors I have in my life. It's like, oh no, like I'm dealing with this car thing and this like work thing, and now also like my parents are reaching out, and like like you panic, and then you like go through what you've practiced, and you're just like, okay, like calm down, they can't actually get you, they don't know where you live, they had to give you a letter through somebody else, like they can't find you, you're good, like nothing has changed, you don't have to respond, you don't have to read it, like whew, like you do get better at that, like coming back from that.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my God. I'm like just the things that you're saying, like I'm reminiscing with so much because I really hope to get to that point. But the thing that you said that just sparked for me was people like trying to reach out through other people. Has that been a common thing that has happened? And is it tapering off now that you're within like this 8-year period? Or do people like, has that been something that has happened a lot where people either tell you that you're wrong for doing this or try to like be some sort of middleman to try to quote fix the situation?
So it's been a little bit of both. I would say that it's less so now because like I actually have a large extended family. Like my immediate inner family with like first cousins and stuff is pretty small. So I have like I'm in contact and like in relationship with all like kind of my second cousins and stuff like that. So there's a lot more of them. It's a pretty big family, um, and because of that closeness that they had with my parents, like my position was like I don't want to make you have to choose between me and my family. I don't want you to put yourself in a situation where you feel like you have to take a side. So if they wanted to see me, they could. But it was like I had a mindset of like they have to reach out to me, um, and just kind of like let them be okay with like still being in a relationship with my parents, and not wanting to make them to feel guilty about it. And over time, there have been like various relatives and stuff like that who've reached out and kind of started to form um, a relationship with me, and being respectful of me being like not in contact with my parents. But I think it was really difficult for people to initially understand. Like my one second cousin, I love her to death. I remember it had been like probably about a year or so that I had been no contact. And she reached out and she's like, I really want to understand this. Like she wasn't trying to make me fix anything, but she was the only one who kind of was willing to ask. There, like, because I think my general family's reaction was like, "There's some drama. We're just not going to ask, and we're just going to keep going and see how things settle." And I really appreciated that she was willing to ask. And now, even just like years later, like I kind of like she was in town last year, and so we had coffee and just did our nails together and talking to her, and she's going through like some of her own stuff like now that she's starting a family, and just like read it like how her life is transforming, like not necessarily reaction to trauma or anything, but just having more wisdom, like being able to talk to her in a different way. And I think that she can see how much I've grown. And sometimes like another cousin or someone will say something that tells me that they saw a glimpse of what I lived with. They'll be like, oh well, like that, you know how like parent is. And I'm just like, oh, you saw it. You saw it. Okay, because like no one ever would talk to us about that directly when you're in family, and then they're being polite about it and not talking about it outside of that. But I'm like, okay, like that's so validating when somebody's just like, but you know how that person is. I'm like, I absolutely do. But it is validating to hear that. And I remember like having like some relatives I talked to, and they'd be like, "No, you're like just over exaggerating. You're being rude." And they'd list all these positive qualities that they only got to see on the one side of certain parents. And so I got really careful. Like, okay, they're not willing to hear me on my side. But then having another relative, like I would delicately say, like, well, this one parent, don't know if you've noticed, but like they have a tendency to be pretty codependent. And just having like that one person being like, oh yeah, 100%. And I was like, oh thank God, I'm not crazy. Like I feel secure in my decision, and like I know what I experienced. I'm not gonna let anyone gaslight me out of that. But like, oh my God, you see it. Thank you. Like,
Right. Wow.
yeah,
I do have to say I love that for you.
yeah.
It sounds like a very, like, positive thing, right, where you're able to find at least one person who understood and just kind of be able to distance yourself from the people who didn't, and I really do love that. I come from a long line of narcissist women, unfortunately. So me going no contact was a very huge point of contention with my family, and it was really frustrating because these people are enablers. This is why I've had a willingness to cut them off because all they've done, none of them, and I will say this loud and proud, none of them were there for my mother. None of them. There was nobody helping her fix or change a flat tire. There was nobody who was willing to help her find an apartment. There was nobody other than her children who were willing to help her move, or people who were willing to encourage her to go to therapy. But all these people, they will they will manipulate her to do and to feel what validates them. And that is the most infuriating part because they too smear campaign. My mother had gone on this huge long smear campaign of me, and it was very frustrating. And I would have people who by all accounts, I've never really talked to them. Like I had a family member who was never a part of my childhood. Like you'd see them here and there, but never to the point where this person had any sort of authority, let alone an influence with me. We didn't have that relationship. This person texted me out of the blue, and this is a person who is my mother's age. We're talking about a 60-year-old adult, okay, who called me. They're like, "You're a baby. You're acting like a baby during this situation." And I was trying to be polite and explaining, like, you didn't see these things. This is what happened. This is why. This person continued to be like, "Well, did you tell?" Like, I think one of the examples I use is my mom is very physically and verbally abusive. Okay, I can't have that with my children. And she would say, "Well, did you ask her not to? Are you fucking kidding me? Like, how stupid do you have to be?" And just continuing to make excuses, but then also say, "Oh, well, she's mentally ill or whatever," but then would never. If you really truly think somebody has mental health issues, or you think that they're, have something going on, you would fucking encourage them to get help. So that was one experience that I'd had. It's always out
I'm
of the fucking blue. I
so
swear to
sorry
God,
that you
it's
had that experience. Like, sorry,
it's
I'm
so
sorry. It's like, did you
frustrating.
ask her not to do that? It's like, I'm sorry. The default should be not doing it. This is not something you should even have to ask for her not to do. Like, it would be different if she was like, I don't know, like unloading your dishwasher and putting all the dishes away in the wrong place. And it's like, could you not do it that way, please? This is like, please don't hit me and call me names. Like that is not how we operate as a society. Like you don't go up to like you're standing at a bus stop or whatever and you say to the person next to you, it's like, oh, by the way, please don't hit me or yell at me, please. Like, no, that is the assumed default position. So like to that person, I'm just like, what world do you live in that like it only doesn't happen to you if you ask them first? Like, no, like,
Yes.
yeah.
Isn't that wild? That
That
was
is
so,
wild.
and I had another person, another family member of the same age. These are all boomers, like legit boomers. The other person, I remember I made a TikTok, and this was when I really started to feel brave enough to talk about it. This person commented, I had since deleted the comment. I didn't delete the video, but she had said, "Well, you have to take some responsibility in what you did too." I'm like, "Okay, you're right. Let me go and understand that 7-year-old me, 8, even 16-year-old me, you're telling me that I need to take responsibility as a child. I don't care if you're 16, 17, or even 18 years old. If you're raised by a very toxic person and you have toxic reactions, we need to understand that a lot of these are learned behaviors. And if I'm changing and I'm like owning up to what I did do wrong, but you're not holding the other person accountable, and you're holding the child accountable is fucking ridiculous. I will never be okay with that. If my child like has a moment of lash out, if for example, I'm not going to blame him. I'm not going to say it's your fault. I'm going to understand something happened to cause this reaction, and what do I need to do to change the environment to let you know that, one, it's okay. It's okay that you had that reaction. We're human. We come from a fucking family of crazy ass people. Like, it's okay. But like, let's talk about it. Let's figure this out. I'm not by any means a perfect parent, but I know that I don't want to be like that. So that was the second thing that this person did. That I also have her kids and a couple other people who are talking shit about me on Facebook, which is great. I don't care. And then I had somebody else who reached out to me recently who kind of did spark that episode that we had talked about, where I was talking about like the fact that I'm not going to stop talking about it. And this person was the same person who said that they didn't have that experience with my mom, and that I need to stop talking about it online, and that I'm a what did they say? I was you're a spoon fed baby, is what they said. And what's really interesting is that that's not the case. In fact, that person was probably more spoon fed and privileged than I was, because I didn't have the family member who bought my first 3 cars. I didn't have and not to say that that person like was good to them, but they had another parent. They didn't live with my mom 24/7. Myself and my father are the only 2 people who have ever lived with my mother for over a decade. The only 2. I had, family members who would maybe take her in for a little bit, or she'd go stay the night at their house. But by all accounts, they don't know her. They know what she's giving them. And nobody has a willingness to accept that their family member is abusive. That's just a fact. My dad always said too. He said, when you bring abuse to light, there's a victim, but there's also a perpetrator. And people are uncomfortable with that because that person could be somebody that they've always felt fond of. And they don't want to admit that this person that they've known is capable of that. And they'll make excuses and want to keep this person in the positive light
Yeah,
that
no,
they had.
100%. I did have a cousin who was more in that kind of attitude, and that was the one that I kind of learned the lesson of, like, oh, like, I can't just tell everybody what I'm going through, and if I'm like, going to make them, or like have the possibility of them seeing where I'm coming from, I have to be a little more diplomatic, which was why later on I was just like, I don't know if you noticed, but parent is a little bit like kind of extremely codependent, opposed to like before I was like, this was happening, this was happening, this was happening. It's just like, no, this is the good thing that this person has done, that person was doing, and that and that, and I see this, and you're being overcritical. And I was just like, so like, you're not a safe person to me. That's what like, and I was like really like upset about that later, but it was also a lot earlier on in my journey. But like, for somebody to be like, I didn't have that experience with them, therefore your experience didn't happen. I'm just like, well, I've never been to the pyramids of Egypt, but I'm not going to say that they don't exist because somebody else is like, I went there and I took pictures and I had a great time. Like, just because it's not your experience doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Um, so yeah, and I'm sorry that that person was like that to you too. I'm just like, oh my goodness, like, and it's yeah, like, no, it's not okay. It's
I mean,
not
it's
okay that happened. Yeah,
never,
yeah,
it's never
but
going to be okay, but I also I give grace where I can, because I have to remember that everybody is at a different place in their lives, and the good thing is that all of these people reached out to me. I have never once gone out of my way to tell somebody that I have no contact with my mother, that I have no reason to smear campaign her. If people want to ask, I will tell them. Like, I have a cousin who, she is my second cousin. She's amazing. I love her. I love her wife. These are great people. She gets it. She knows that we come from a long line of narcissistic women, specifically the women. I will say, like, I, there are men in the family that I do think are narcissistic themselves, but they're more of sycophants than anything. Like, I do not see them as standing up to these very dominant women. And hey, I am all about strong women in the world, but not to the extent that they are. And it's very unfortunate. I'm very grateful that my dad's side of the family, literally nobody's like that. But for people to go out of their way without having all of the information, to not even ask what happened, just attacking immediately based on what they know, it shows a level of their mental maturity. And I have to say, okay, well, this person, like, doesn't get it, and there's a reason why they don't get it. Maybe it's their own trauma. I'm not going to tell them that they have to feel the same way as me, but at the same time, if they don't have the wherewithal to ask me what happened, it means that they don't understand, and they're not going to understand. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to be besties with them and give them grace. I'll love them from a distance, but I'm still blocking them. I don't care how close they are to me. It doesn't matter. What matters is protecting my peace. But I've really tried to internally understand that, okay, and I have to talk it out because I'll get pissed. I'll get pissed and I'll cry and I get triggered. I get fucking angry. And then I kind of regress into the emotions that I learned as a result of having a parent who had those large reactions. Thankfully, I do have another parent who is the voice of reason. And I'll call my dad and be like, Dad, this just happened. Like, he's like, okay, consider the source. That's like the first thing that he says. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And he's like, was that person ever there? No, that person didn't live your life. That person, they can have their opinion, but that doesn't make your experience wrong. So I'm very glad to have a voice of reason that is somebody who is a parent to me. But for other people who are out there, I'm telling you guys, if you haven't been in this situation, you don't understand the emotions that come behind it. And it's really sad because there's so, oh my gosh, there's so much to be said about this situation. But one of the things that I did want to ask you was, what are like, and I because we've talked about before. If you guys haven't heard Ixia's episode with Ixia, Taz, Erica, and Megan, or my previous episode with Ixia as far as religion and manipulation goes in a cult, she was a part of Worldwide. She was a part of Amway. Do you feel as though your upbringing kind of prepared you for that, or to enter into relationships, or to be who wouldn't necessarily be who Ixia is today? Like, did
oh,
that set you up for
100%.
toxicity?
100%. So It's really funny because you're talking about like how people had different reactions. I have a funny story kind of related to that. Like, I was still in contact with my grandpa for a long time after I went no contact with my parents, and so sometimes I'd go to church events with him where my parents would be, but I only went like when I felt comfortable. But the first time that happened, everybody in the church, because it was a small church, came up and asked me how I was. People who like wouldn't necessarily talk to me on Sunday, that maybe my mom would like hang out with and like talk and be part of like groups with, but like they wouldn't talk to me on a Sunday, and they wouldn't have previously been bothered if I hadn't shown up for long periods of time. And they were like, "How are you?" And I would be like, "I'm doing great." Like, and I was comparatively, I was getting better, and I was getting in a place where I was getting my life on track. So I'm like, "I'm doing great." And they'd always look at me like smile, but with like that "I don't believe you" face. And I later found out from my grandpa that my mom was telling people that I joined a cult, which was hilarious to me at the time. And it wasn't worldwide. The thing is, at the time, I didn't think worldwide was a cult. And even though it is very culty, I would actually say that like my mom's argument was still invalid because no one in worldwide told me to make the choice that I did. Like, I made that choice and acted out that choice without ever consulting upline, and with like, as I mentioned in the episode where we went over our worldwide experiences, that I had been originally in one line of sponsorship, quit for a while, and then joined another line of sponsorship. And the original line of sponsorship, I did not counsel upline. I went no contact, and I quit because I couldn't afford to maintain the partnership while I was figuring my life out on my own and going no contact and living by myself and paying all my own bills and working crappy jobs. And when I joined Gio and Missy's organization, like, Missy was also no contact with her parents, so she had like she appealed to me in that way because we had that in common. We could relate, and I could quote counsel with her about struggles around that. And so it wasn't like they told me to do that. It was like, oh, like, I understand where you're coming from, and I can help you like talk through these emotions and those feelings, and I'm further along in this experience than you are, and so I can give you some wisdom and insight. And that was something I was thankful for with that sponsorship under Gio and Missy, is that I had that in common with Missy, and I did get some good advice from her around that. Um, but like, in terms of like, was I primed for worldwide? Absolutely. Like, because I was just coming out of school, like graduating, hadn't found a job, didn't like I was given that boomer advice of like, don't focus on whatever degree you get. Any degree will get you a job. That was true for the boomers. That is not true for millennials. And so I had two comparatively useless degrees. I had English and drama, and honestly, like, loved having studied that stuff. Wish I'd gone into something like with a little more forethought. So I'm like, I have no job prospects. I'm not going to school anymore, so I have no identity of student. I've just lost this significant other relationship. I am not sure what I'm doing with my life. My family's judging the hell out of me for being depressed. And then this person comes in being like, I have this opportunity for like financial freedom. And you go there and you have all these marriages on stage. Not to mention, like, I went from like meet and greet 1 and 2 to like spring leadership, which is like, yeah, so it's like, and I didn't understand what was happening, but I saw all these people on stage who were talking about how this business changed their life, how they had like such better marriages, and I just lost a relationship with somebody who I like naively and kind of very in the mental headspace I was, thought that I wanted to marry, and was devastated and left. So like, I was like, oh, like this, like I could have like that marriage with this person, and just all these kind of things that set me up. And then you get to like on the ground level when you're in the organization, and they're telling you, we believe in you, we're proud of you, we love you, we care about you, and actually like verbalizing that, I cannot remember once hearing the words "I'm proud of you" from my parents. They might have been, maybe, but I actually don't know. Definitely didn't feel like they were ever proud of me, and definitely never heard it. So when you and when you're just kind of like living life to fulfill the family tableau, my mom was very concerned about the appearance of making sure that we looked like a good family, and like didn't want any of our drama or like dysfunction to show. And also she didn't think it was dysfunction. Like, so you're this cardboard cutout of yourself operating within this play, and so you can't be who you are. And if you are who you are, you're stepping out of your role, and then coming to this place where they're like, hey, we're proud of you and we accept you, like, you're doing this, that's awesome, we believe in you. When you're playing a cardboard cutout role, you don't hear "we believe in you." because it's like, no, 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 this is how you're supposed to be. And if you're deviating from that, it's not like you're following your dreams. You are deviating from how you're supposed to be. And so I was so primed to hear that. Like I was so hungry to hear that, and like actually saw like results. Like I don't think that they're true, but they were presented as true results that you could have. I was so primed for that. Like it was everything that I ever wanted, and I was like the control stuff, like the culty stuff, the religious stuff that was happening in there wasn't unfamiliar to me because a lot of those same kind of attitudes were happening in my family. All of that kind of like atmosphere. But in this arena, it's better because they're actually telling you I love you. They're actually telling you I'm proud of you. They're telling you we believe in you and your dreams and you can do anything. Like this will give you everything you want and you can have the spouse, the kids, the doing the causes, the changing the world. You can get that here. And I wanted that so much. So I was totally primed to be sucked into worldwide. And ironically, like a lot of the books on their book list are actually good because they're from outside of worldwide and they're actually good business principles. But I was also doing a lot of reading. I couldn't afford therapy. Like when I moved out, and I couldn't even afford partnership, like let alone therapy. Like therapy is not covered by Canadian healthcare, unfortunately, unless it's like asterisk specific situations and you have to like be struggling with very specific things to get it covered by Alberta healthcare. So I was doing as much as I could on my own, like reading that book, like running on empty. Then I read Divorcing a Parent, which is actually a really, really good book about going no contact. And one thing she really emphasized in that was make sure that you're going no contact for the right reasons. And the right reasons are like you want to improve your life, you want to be in a better place, and freeing yourself from this will help. Don't do it to be spiteful, to teach your family a lesson, to go like try to hurt them and take revenge. That's not what it's going to be. And so when I read that, I was like, oh well, that's why I want. Like I'm not trying to get back at them. I just like I think what like strange parents don't understand is like no 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 no. This isn't about you. We literally just want to exist without you in our lives. That is all we want. Just existing without you. That's it. We are not thinking about you at all unless you insert yourself into your life and like are being nosy. Uh, and we are living rent free in your head, and I'm just over here picking flowers, thinking about did I leave the stove on? Like that is that is what's happening. So, anyways, but I was primed for getting in an environment like Worldwide, and I think it was kind of like the combination of those books were kind of overlapped with kind of some of the reading that I was doing on my own, like talking about getting rid of shame, like Brene Brown books and um, John Maxwell kind of stuff, like leadership and leading yourself and getting your like all of it was kind of linked with the stuff that I was reading. So I think just because I was so hungry for that personal development aspect of Worldwide, I probably stayed in longer than I normally would have if I was a much more well-adjusted person. And that's kind of what makes the Worldwide experience a little bit more complicated is that it wasn't all bad. It wasn't all controlling. It wasn't all Giovanni standing on his soapbox, like using far right Christian QAnon rhetoric, telling everybody that they're going to hell. It was like, actually, I am learning about being a better person. I am learning about like these different skills. So like, I did take some positive things away from Worldwide, but that doesn't mean that I think that Amway and Worldwide should continue to exist as companies because the toxic stuff that is there does not like the good stuff that's happening does not justify the toxic stuff to put up with it. So um, yeah, so like I on one hand I'm like yes I technically was on a cult, but I did get some good things from it. But I don't think I wouldn't do it again, and I wouldn't recommend anybody getting into it. So
Right.
yeah, but I was primed.
Wow.
That answers the question there.
Yeah. I mean, this is the things that I wish people would understand are how these kinds of environments, these family dynamics, how toxic they are to a person as they're growing up, right? And it's sad, but they don't get it that having an abusive home can lead you to abuse in adulthood, whether it's joining a cult or entering into an abusive DV relationship or having toxic friends. Like this is the reason why we have made the decision to cut this so we don't further have these experiences anymore. Like I'm so tired of having shitty friends, which we talked about, or I'm so tired of my life and my decisions being a result of the abuse. I just wanted, like you said, I want to live my life without them. I need to separate myself from that. I need to not be a part of that. And then, the also the understanding that I not everybody's going to get it. And I do have to say that you're absolutely right that there are things that can come from that had come from being a part of world. I think everybody's experience is different, and also, I do have to say that they like, and I think I've mentioned this all the time, that they took me from one level of brainwashing to another, and I'm okay that they took this level of brainwashing away. That I will always be grateful for. But we're coming up on time here, about an hour, so I definitely think we should do a part two because I don't think I even got through half of the questions that I have. But I did want to say, like, what are some last final thoughts that you have? If there's one thing that people could take away from this.
Oh, well, I think definitely any thoughts that aren't short enough that they can go at the end here. They definitely are going to part two. But I will say this one thing that I've thought about recently that kind of stood out to me that I'm like, I think people need to understand this. The idea of being in contact with your family for your whole life, um, and not ever separating, I think is actually much more a new idea. Because think of, like, we both live in North America, and our families, for the most part, came from other parts of the world. Like, I don't have any indigenous heritage. I don't know about you, but I know that, like, I'm not indigenous. Like, my family has been immigration from other parts of the world, mostly from Europe. People who got on those first boats, and up until, like, basically the Victorian period, if they made the decision to go start a new life in the new world, they were never going to see those families again. Like, letters would be hard, especially the farther back you go, and you don't have as much technology to make that journey safely on a regular basis. Like, you were never going to see your family again. And people were allowed to do that. If we had the same attitude of, like, oh, but that's your family, you can't ever abandon them, like, nobody would have come here. Like, they would have all stayed home. And yes, there were people who did stay because there's still people living in those parts of the world. But I think there was this cultural understanding that it was okay to put your future above your family. Like, if you were choosing, like, you know what, I want to start a new life and get on a boat and go to New York and see what America holds for me, your family would probably let you go. They'd send you off and be like, absolutely, like, we're going to miss you. We don't know if we'll ever see you again, but we love you, and this is for your future. Like, you have our blessing. Go. And if it was a toxic family, there wasn't really anything you could do about it. It's just like there's no Facebook to follow up. It's like, oh, how is he surviving in the new world? Like, so I think this idea of, like, you have to be in contact with your family for their entire lives, that, like, and put them ahead of your future or your own well-being is actually a really new idea because of the technology we have, and it's quite a privileged idea. I think that we're just kind of doing something that's natural in the history of humanity. Like, even if we want to tie it back to the Bible for any religious people looking, it's just like the story of Abraham is just like, God said, I'm going to send you to a place where you're going to settle and build your land, and just go. And he's like, well, where am I going? It's like, you'll just follow me. And so he's like, hey, wife, we're Sarah, we're God told me we're going to go. And she's like, where are we going? He's like, I don't know. And it's like, okay. And then they left all their family behind and just followed God. Like, if somebody said that now, it's just like, I'm going to go away and, like, go no contact and go somewhere and, like, follow God. If you're not from, like, a religious background, like a really religious background, people are like, are you crazy? Like, are you okay? Like, something's wrong here. Like, so I think we've kind of gotten it on its head. And I don't necessarily say that maybe it's wrong, because the culture shifts and our attitudes shift. But to say that it was that society is falling apart, and I've heard some people say that, that, like, this is the erosion of, like, the family unit. It's like, no, this isn't new. Society has survived from people leaving and never being able to see their families again. It's okay. This isn't new. Circumstances might be different, but it's not unnatural. So that's my
Wow.
final thought.
I hope that you guys took that in because I'm still going to be taking that in. Holy shit. Yeah. Wow. Oh my God. Yes. Yeah. Actually, a quick anecdote to that because you're so right. What's really interesting is I'd never seen the movie The Titanic. It was no, I still can't get into it. So if you guys are out there and you love the Titanic, I'm sorry, that is not me. I could not get into it, but the story still fascinates me. And I was watching a very short documentary about how I think it was what there's I think I don't recall. So if I'm wrong, like if I'm getting this 100% inaccurate, I apologize, but it's the sentiment behind it that matters. So there is a another country, I don't remember if it was Ireland or Scotland. Either it was one of the two, where the families were leaving and they would have like a celebration that was almost like, I think they referred to it as almost like a funeral. Like they knew that their family was leaving, that they would probably never see them again, but they were very happy that their family members were going to live their dreams. I mean, granted, these families did not make it because of the Titanic. Anyway, sorry, but that's something that was a sentiment back then, and I think that you're absolutely right. Like in different cultures too, they view death differently. They view so many things differently that I really wish were more acceptable today in North America. I would love that to happen, but I think that you gave us so much to absorb that by the time part two comes, we'll have so much more to say. But thank you again so much for coming and talking about this. I will always be open to talking about this. If you guys want to be like Ixia and come and have a conversation about toxic relationships, MLM stuff, mental health, like we're open to all the topics. It doesn't just have to be Amway, but it's always a huge benefits. People love the Amway, the anti-MLM stuff, but we're open to all types of conversations that I really hope will become the mainstream one day. So you guys can follow me on Instagram at exesandt.podcast. You guys can email me at DANI@exesandtpodcast.com. You guys can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere else podcasts are heard. We'll catch you guys on the next episode. Now there's the recording. There we go.